We're going to talk about pooling in ArcGIS Server, what is it, and all the different configurations that you can do. Stay tuned. What is up, y'all? This is Hussein Nasser from iGeometry Podcast. And welcome to another podcast, ArcGIS Talk. Today we're going to talk about pooling. Today they're expecting temperature to be really high, I think 110. Yeah, so it's still early, still 6:30 in the morning, so it's around 25 Celsius here. So it's not really bad, 69, 70 here in Redland, California. So yeah, pooling, right? So in the previous episode, we discussed process isolation, a very important concept to know. So it's good that we discussed that first. Pooling happens. So pooling or connection pooling is a way to kind of scale your service that you have published. We didn't talk about publishing, but assume let's say we have a service published to my ArcGIS server stack, and you can configure different connection pooling on your service. So by default, when you publish a service, you will get, I think, a minimum of one connection or maximum of like a two connection. So what does these numbers mean, right? Oh man, sprinklers are out. All right. So yeah, so if you have like two instances running, let's talk about the number of instances running at a time. So if I have like one instance running of this server, so two instances running. So what does really that mean, and why do we really need that? Okay, so if I have one instance, essentially mean a connection or a workspace to connection to the geodatabase, essentially. So it's like if the backend is also a database. If you're using multi-user enterprise geodatabase, it will be like a Oracle, Postgres, SQL Server, or HANA, or DB2, right? Whatever is supported. So you can publish that and you consume that. So one instance running means one workspace connecting to that, right? So that's essentially what an instance is. Now, you have an option. Remember when we discussed process isolation? If you have high isolation, which is the default, each instance, each workspace will live in a single process. And so you'll be completely isolated in your own process, in your world. So now you will have, like, if you have two running instances, you essentially have two processes, right? Make sense? Cool. So now, remember, these processes are agnostic, and then every user who hits the service now, hits the REST endpoint, let's say /query, I'm going to query for something, ArcGIS Server will start managing that for you. It says, okay, someone started using one instance. So let's say, all right, so one instance, like I say, two instances are free now. And you hit the user, you hit the service, and then that request will be forwarded to that instance. You say, okay, user A, you'll start using this instance, all right? And then you do your query, and there, during that time, that connection will be blocked, and they'll be used by that user. So no one else can kind of reuse that connection to do other things, right? So essentially, you have one user per connection at that, just a fraction of time used for executing that query. So as long as the user is actually executing that query, it's going to take 300 milliseconds, 20 milliseconds, 50, it depends on how heavy your request was. Let's say you make a request to fetch all data. That's going to take a long time, right? Time to query the database, that's quick. Time to package that request into JSON or whatever the format you requested it, and that time to actually return that result. So all that is just, it's going to take time, right? A lot of factors play there. We'll talk about them at another time. But let's say I'm executing a request. So if someone else, so now we have one busy instance and another one free. Another user came at the same time. Hey, I want to execute a write, for example. So we're going to hit the other instance. Oh, yeah, we have one free instance. Go ahead. So we have now one instance, right, busy querying, another instance busy writing, right? Remember, this is all happening in fractions of a second, right? It's really quick. This is like, say, we're really unlucky. And then another user come, right, and start, you want to request a new instance. I say, I want to do a query. And unfortunately, during that fraction of a second, that user has to wait until one of those two finishes, right? One of those two has to finish, because this brings up to the first property in pooling, which is the maximum number of instances. In my case, it was set to 2. Hey, for this service, the maximum number of instances is 2. Don't go beyond that, no matter what. No matter what, just stick with 2, okay? So if those 2 instances are busy, they are in use, that's the second property. If they are in use, number of instances in use, you can go to Server Manager and you can actually see that, right? And then, so if I have 2 in use and I have a third request coming, that user has to wait, right? It has to wait for a free instance. That time, that wait time for that request is called essentially wait time, right? There is a property called, that's our third property here. So wait time. So we have maximum instances in use, and then the wait time, how long that request can wait before it just gives up and time out to the client, which is JavaScript or Pro or ArcMap, whatever, right? So that's another thing, the wait time, all right? And there's like I think that's pretty much it, right? Oh yeah, that's another thing. So if one instance of those 2 is just freed up, hey, my query is done, ArcGIS Server will release that and then return to that user. And that user who's waiting, their other request, the third request, can now pick up that free instance and start executing stuff, right? So that's just like how ArcGIS Server pooling works, just reusing these connections, which is, instead of recreating each connection per user, which is extremely expensive, right? As opposed to the old model in ArcMap or ArcPro, when you hit a connection directly, you hit the database directly, you would have to establish a new connection per user, right? Now, with ArcGIS Server model, we're sharing this instance. We're still sharing one per user, but it's per request kind of thing. It's completely stateless. So one user can hit this connection, use it, and then another user can hit the same connection and use it, right? The old model, each workspace is your own. That's it. All right. What else? Yes. Maximum. Remember that writing query? Let's say this guy is writing a huge batch job, right? He decides to write a huge apply edit. And that's taking more than, I don't know, it's taking a long time. So you want to set a time after which, the maximum time after which the user must be killed. That request must be just dropped, right? So what we do is that's the maximum time a client can use that service. So that's the 5th or 4th property. I lost count, dude. So that's like the maximum time a client can use an instance, right? So after which we just the ArcGIS service, hey, you know what, man? You've been using this service a lot, and you've been querying. Something is wrong. You shouldn't spend 1 minute executing a query. You're doing something wrong. So we don't allow you. So you just kind of hit him on the hand, and then just time out his request and just send him back. So hey, do better. Just execute a better query. We can't let you do this. You're just hogging the database, right? So you want to play with this configuration in a very smart way, based on your use cases, based on your business, right? So it's like maybe your requests are essentially long-running batch jobs, which takes like minutes or even hours. So you want to increase that, right? You want to increase that. You want to probably put that service in a completely different cluster. I think we talked about clusters as well. Just like instead of just hogging this machine, just, you know what, that particular service, that particular request, let's move it to that machine, which is like it's a highly available beefy machine. So you don't hog the simple query efficient query maps navigation stuff, right? Zoom in, zoom out. I don't want these guys to wait for a zoom out and a zoom in while you execute your precious analytics, right? All right, guys. I think I covered all of those pooling connections. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm going to see you in the next one. You guys stay awesome and stay hydrated too.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.